Hello, hello. I'm sitting here on my patio with a sleeping Labrador on my lap, and it's a beautifully sunny day. I think it must be like late teens, early 20s maybe, warmth-wise. I've got the laundry out. There's such a simple pleasure to be got from just hanging your laundry out on the washing line. We have a dry soon, like a heated drying rack, for drying laundry over the winter, and like it's fine, but obviously it costs money to run. Electricity. Our electricity is all renewable on the with Octopus energy, and we're on the renewable plan. I think maybe all of Octopus is renewable, thinking about it. So I don't feel overly guilty from that point of view, but obviously anything you can do to reduce your energy consumption is a good thing, right, for both the environment and your wallet, and especially these days where energy bills are so expensive. So it's really satisfying to be able to hang out stuff on the line and just let the sun do the work for free. But also it's just nice, isn't it? It smells nicer when you take the laundry in and it's been drying outside. It's nice to see it sort of. We've got quite a traditional laundry setup, like the washing line. It's not a whirligig, it's an actual washing line that goes from diagonally across our patio from the garage wall to an old holly tree, what's the word? Trunk? Yeah, trunk. With a washing pole and whatnot. And it's quite meditative sitting here watching it sort of gently swaying forwards and backwards. Is that really tragic that I'm just recording a voice note right now to you all about my laundry? Is this the content you've subscribed to? But I'm very aware it's been a few weeks since I've recorded one of these. And if I'm honest, I've just been exhausted. I think we all go through these phases, right, where life is just busy, overwhelming, stressful, often with things out with your control as well, so things that you don't really feel like you can reschedule or cancel, some of which have been joy things. So like my friend Karen came to visit the weekend. Hi Karen, if you're listening. And it was really lovely to see her because I haven't seen her since I moved up here last summer. And she's really knowledgeable about plants, so we went around my garden together and she was helping me identify some of the shrubs and trees that I've got growing in the front garden especially. Of course I didn't write any of it down, so now I'm going around by myself thinking, I can't remember what Karen said this was, that's annoying. But I'm hoping that with the help of Google Lens I'll be able to Google some of this stuff and then recognise the name, because part of the problem with Google Lens is you search for things, and sometimes it's very obvious what it is, and other times it brings up like 5 or 6 different options that all could be accurate. So I'm kind of hoping that in those scenarios I would then rely on my memory of Karen being like, oh, it's this, and that being the sort of deciding factor. So yeah, it was really lovely to see Karen, and like Andrew's brother is in town. He lives in Canada, so it's nice to see him. But it's just, when you're already quite busy and stressed and kind of at the limit of what you can manage, and then there's these extra things which are joyful and you want to do and you want to see people, but the end result is ultimately that you end up feeling exhausted. So I was at work until 1:30 last night, having an inspection thing that we've been preparing for months. So I'm glad that's out the way, but I then had to get up early this morning for a person coming to give us a quote on putting in French doors. And don't get me wrong, this is a very first world problems to complain about, but just exhausted now. I'm sitting here in the garden. I've had my lunch. I've just eaten far too much Easter egg. It was very enjoyable, but much more calorific than I was expecting. And I'm just gearing up to mow the lawn, but it's just very pleasant, and I basically just don't want to get up. I'm currently reading the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. So these came out a few years ago, so I am a bit late to this particular party. And for those who aren't aware, it's sort of a fantasy action series with a decent amount of smut thrown in, so kind of sex scenes basically, and angst and emotions and love triangles and all that kind of stuff, all set against a backdrop of sort of war between fairy realms and the human world and whatnot. And they're very enjoyable. I mean, they're I would kind of consider them, no shade to anyone who enjoys this series, a little bit on the trashy end of the spectrum in terms of the quality of the writing, but that doesn't make them any less enjoyable. Sort of similarly to how I felt when I read Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey, like they're, well written enough that you can enjoy them, but nobody, they're not going to become classics, snobby though that sounds. But there are 5 books, and I'm on to the 4th. And they're quite gripping. She's quite good at sort of leaving each chapter on a bit of a cliffhanger, so then you end up thinking like, oh, I'll just read another chapter, I'll just need to read another chapter. Generally the chapters are quite short as well, so you kind of feel like, oh, well, I'll just sit here for another 5 minutes, and then suddenly half an hour's gone by, but at this point in my life where I do feel quite overwhelmed by work and renovation stuff particularly, it's nice to have that kind of book where it doesn't take a huge amount of brain power. Ironic that I stumbled over trying to find the word brain power there. Doesn't take too much brain power, but they're like enjoyable and gripping enough that sort of time just slips away. I really love that feeling. I remember as a kid feeling that. We used to go to the library every weekend on a Saturday, and we would get out a bunch of books, and then generally I would spend the Saturday afternoon sort of curled up in a beanbag by a radiator reading Sam the Girl Detective or whatever. And I feel like as an adult it's easy to lose that sense of sort of time standing still, like quite often for me personally, and I'm sure I'm not alone here, I feel like I'm kind of rushing from one thing to the next, sort of trying to maximize my productivity, like get as much out of every day as possible, keeping sort of life admin going, projects going, renovation stuff, work things, keeping up with friends, keeping up with family, things like writing the blog, which I really enjoy, and recording this little podcast / voice note to you all. I haven't done it for a couple of weeks because I've just felt my brain has just been a bit sort of overwrought, a bit thrawn, as my mother-in-law would say, and then it's just hard to get into that sort of creative headspace that allows you to produce this sort of creative work, I guess, and sometimes it's nice to have a book like ACOTAR, which is the acronym for those who are into the sexy fairy world. Sometimes it's nice to have something like ACOTAR to just like lose yourself in, and especially right now I'm like sitting on my patio soaking up the sunbeams. The baby Labrador's here keeping me company. I can look over my raised bed, I can see my chives, which are considering flowering, my potatoes, which actually need earthed up. I'm going through so much compost at the moment, it's costing me an arm and a leg, but hopefully this time next year I'll have some of my own home-produced compost for this kind of stuff. My rhubarb's coming away. I planted out my sweet peas today. I made them a little wigwam out of some branches I cut from a shrub that's sort of struggling away under a tree. It's got quite a lot of dead branches, so I just cut some of them off. And I can see I moved my sage recently and managed to split 2 or 3 extra little sage plants off it, so I've put them in the raised bed just to give them a bit of a boost. I probably won't keep them there permanently as they get bigger, but maybe I will. But yeah, probably I'll plant them out somewhere else in time. But yeah, it's just really lovely to sit here with a book, and that's one thing I've been really enjoying from the Artist's Way, the Bare Minimum Artist's Way series that I'm working through. Another thing that I feel overwhelmed and overstretched on, because I think I'm only on week 5 and internet people are on like week 11 or 12 now, so I am quite significantly behind, but 'twas ever thus, and I'm trying really hard not to beat myself up about it. But in one of the weeks, Julia Cameron has you do this sort of reading ban almost, and obviously this book was written in like the 90s, so it was pre-internet. So Julia's idea is that, if you spend a lot of time reading books, magazines, newspapers, you don't leave enough space for your own sort of creative thoughts to come through. And obviously that is extremely true, extremely valid point these days, but obviously instead of books, substitute the internet, which is like books times 1,000, right? So actually one thing that I've really enjoyed is a bit of a mobile detox. And don't get me wrong, I am by no means, I'm not like banning myself from using my phone, but I put a screen time widget on my home screen so that I can see how much time I'm spending on my phone, but also it gives you sort of a summary of the top 3 apps that you're using, and how much time you're spending on each one. And I'm just finding that quite useful. Like, there are definitely some days where it's telling me I'm using my phone for, say, 5 hours, but actually the top 3 apps are things like Spotify. It's like, well, I don't really count that, because if I'm busy gardening or doing housework and I'm listening to 2 hours worth of podcasts, it's not the same in my mind as sort of sitting scrolling mindlessly on your phone, you know. But one thing I've noticed is it's helped me a lot cutting down on my Instagram time. I already have a half-hour timer on my Instagram app, and I very rarely go over that, but having the screen time widget really helps that too. And then actually, ironically, because obviously I'm uploading this onto Substack, it's helping me limit my Substack time as well, because I try to read my Substack articles through my actual email, where it's easier to not get distracted, basically, because I find if I read stuff through the Substack app, it's very easy to get distracted by notes, which is essentially just Instagram, but for Substack, right? Or at least social media, but for Substack. Or it's easy to be like, right, well, I'm just going to read this one article, and then because it then suggests the next one to you, you just end up like, again, just aimlessly scrolling, like reading one after the other after the other. Some of them I don't even read in their entirety. You know, I might skim read them, or I might read the first couple of paragraphs, but then not actually complete the article. So it's not that dissimilar to just doom scrolling on social media, right? Or on the news website, where again I don't tend to read articles in depth. I sort of skim read, and essentially it's scratching the same itch in my brain as scrolling on Instagram. So what I don't want to do is replace one unhealthy habit with another, basically. So what I'm trying to do instead is switch to reading actual books, because there are so many books in the world that I want to read. And at the end of my life, I'm not going to look back and think, I wish I'd spent more time on Instagram or on Substack, but I will look back and think, I wish I'd made more time in my life for reading. So yeah, the Court of Thorn and Roses series is just perfect for me right now, because my brain is quite overwhelmed. But I've actually been really enjoying, over the last 3 or 4 years, I think it's been going, a podcast called Pod and Prejudice, which I'll link in the show notes. But essentially the 2 presenters, one's read a lot of Jane Austen, and the other is reading Jane Austen for the first time. And in each season, they pick a Jane Austen book and they read it chapter by chapter and then discuss it. And I'm really loving that. At the end of each season, they do a discussion of the adaptations as well. So any book spin-offs or like TV or film adaptations. And I don't always listen to all of those, because I haven't read or seen all the adaptations. But for example, with Pride and Prejudice, which is probably the Jane Austen book I know the best because we studied it at school, I've seen quite a few of those adaptations, so I listened to all of those episodes because it's quite fun listening to them sort of dissect like the BBC adaptation and giving like little facts that they found out about the behind the scenes of how it was made or whatever. But yeah, mostly I listen to it because I really enjoy rereading these books, because there's a lot of Jane Austen that I haven't really read since school, and then there's some that I've never read, so it's actually just a good opportunity to read it for the first time. So we just finished Persuasion, which I've never read before but very much enjoyed, and it's my best friend Frances, who is an English teacher. It's her favourite Jane Austen, so it was good to have finally read that and then be able to discuss it with Franny B. And I've watched one adaptation of Persuasion, and if I'm honest, I thought it was terrible. Did not capture the characters at all, but I very much enjoyed the book. So far we've read Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Sense and Sensibility, and Persuasion. And I'm really hoping they do Mansfield Park next, because I haven't read that one in, probably like 20 years. And it's quite a meaty one, because it kind of covers topics like sort of colonialism and slavery, as well as your classic kind of Jane Austen sort of sexism in the Regency era, like the patriarchy and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I like Mansfield Park, so I'm hoping they do that one next. But if they do Northanger Abbey, I'd also be fine with that, because I've never read that one. So I think that's the last of the Jane Austens that I've yet to read. So we'll see. They're currently working their way through the adaptations on the podcast, so I'm waiting until the next season drops so I can read along. And the added bonus is it's a good opportunity to buy some nice copies of Jane Austen, because if I'm honest, for having read quite a few of her works, never actually owned nice copies. So I've been going out of my way to go on like eBay and buy sort of, not necessarily that expensive, but just sort of vintage, like leather cover sort of ye olde copies, which seems like an appropriate way to read Jane Austen. So I've now got quite a nice little collection of sort of mismatched but all fairly antiquarian versions of Jane Austen, and you can pick them up for like 10 or 15 quid on eBay, so they're not overly expensive. I mean, obviously you can spend hundreds of pounds on fancier older copies, but that's not really my bag, because I like to read in the bath. I don't really want to spend 300 quid on a first edition and then drop it in the bath, because that would be a disaster. So yeah, and then the third book that I've got going at the moment is called Want by Gillian Anderson. So I'm actually sitting here recording this wearing an X-Files t-shirt, but the X-Files is probably my top favourite TV show of all time. Gillian Anderson is probably up there as one of my favourite actresses of all time, and I've sort of followed her work on and off for years now. I occasionally sort of Google her and listen to whatever podcast interview or whatever she's done recently, but she's just published a book called Want, which is a collection of anonymous women from around the world's sexual and erotic fantasies, and it's just really interesting. Like it's a book that you can kind of pick up and dip in and out of, because it doesn't have a sort of plot line. It's split into, I think, 3 sections. Sorry. And each one is sort of grouped around a rough theme, but the actual individual stories or fantasies are written by individual people, so you can literally pick them up. One might be like 5 paragraphs and one might be like 5 pages. So yeah, I'm just finding it really interesting, just kind of dipping in and out of it, really. And I really respect Gillian Anderson for her sort of opinions on kind of gender and trans people and the LGBT community. She's just a very like open-minded, liberal. She just seems like a nice person, to be honest. The kind of person that you'd probably want to have around for dinner, go for a pint with. And yeah, I think I get the impression that her politics and opinions sort of align quite closely with my own, which makes her quite interesting. Yeah, so that is the third book that I'm reading at the moment. I'm not that far into it, so I might come back and do a little semi-review of it when I'm done. And I would actually like to talk a little bit more about ACOTAR as well, because there's some themes in these sort of fantasy sort of sex books. That makes it sound dodgier than it is, although it is a little on the dodgy spectrum, that I would like to discuss in more detail. But if I'm honest, my brain is a little bit dribbling out my ear hole at the moment, and I'm not sure I would make a particularly like coherent discussion, so I'm going to leave that there for now, as a what's the word I used earlier? Cliffhanger. And what I might do is, once I've finished Want by Gillian Anderson, I might gather some thoughts on that and a guitar, and then do a little bit more of a sort of in-depth review / thoughts for anyone who might be interested in that. But for now, I think I'll leave it here, because I did promise Andrew I would mow the lawn, and I quite like mowing the lawn, so I'll probably put on a podcast and do that. And then I've got a giant rosemary bush that needs moving, because it's not really in the right place. It's starting to go a little bit yellow. I think it could do with some more direct sun. And I've got a little buddleia to move as well, because I bought it off Facebook Marketplace, and I planted it beside the kitchen window because I want to kind of train it up and around the kitchen window. But I've subsequently read that buddleia roots can be quite invasive and can damage brickwork. Worst case scenario, can like damage foundations and things. So that's made me a little bit nervous. So I think I'm going to move that further down the garden, and I'm going to put a Hebe that I bought off Facebook Marketplace in that position instead, which I think is better for shade anyway. So that's probably the one that should have gone there originally. But yeah, for now I'm going to love and leave you. Yeah, I was going to say I'm sorry for the lack of updates in the last couple of weeks, but it's just life, innit? And I always think when content creators that I follow, writers or podcasters or whatever, apologise for their lack of updates, I think, well, you don't owe me anything, and you're doing this as a creative project, and you know, if you drop off the planet for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, then you know, that is your choice at the end of the day. So I'm not going to apologise, but I just want you all to know that I'm thinking of you, and I appreciate your support and comments and likes and engagement on my posts, even if I haven't been the most sort of available in the last few weeks. Hoping over the next couple of weeks to get back to my regular schedule of sort of podcasts on a Wednesday, blog on a Sunday, but equally I'm going to give myself grace that if I continue to feel tired and overwhelmed, that this is one place in my life where I have basically complete control, and if I need to kind of mentally check out from this for a little while, then sort of so be it. You know, you don't create good creative work from a place of, I don't want to say burnout because that sounds more serious than it is, but from a place of sort of tiredness, basically. So, but for now, I'm going to channel my best DIY dad and go mow the lawn. It's a bit sexist, wasn't it? Girls can mow the lawn too. And I hope wherever you are, the sun is shining for you, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.